real code red. Got us by the balls, we're being slowly bled. All the swollen puppet head, propagandized. Big chocolate points, flat out lies. A house full of mirrors, it's a lousy reflection. Run hard left, it's a true direction. Democracy's in trouble, this news isn't fake. Everything we fought for is truly at stake. Border to border, coast to coast, it's time to cue the challenge and meet our host. It's a podcast by George. All right, folks, it's showtime.
Oh, hi, how are you? Welcome on into another podcast by George. Thank you, Bob Pace, for that outstanding introduction. I love that piece, and it shows Lee Camp on it, and that's who we've got coming on the show today. Man, I am tickled to death. As I mentioned in the show last night when we had Desharm Jones on, I'm in the midst of my official anniversary month for Podcast by George. 5 years I've been doing this, so I'm calling on some people that I really like. A lot of times I put things on that I feel need to be on, but I'm doing things this month that I want to be on, and I want to have Lee Camp on here. I hope you saw the promo here. Let me bring this up on screen because this, kind of gets to it. This is what we're going to be talking about today. Lee Camp, always left, always right. What? Lee Camp, right? Right as in correct, folks. And let me do his introduction here. A lot of people say he doesn't need an introduction, but hell, I like doing them, so I'm going to read this. Lee Camp is an American comedian, writer, podcaster, news journalist, and news commentator. As a television host, he presented the show Redacted Tonight for 8 years on the Russian state-funded network RT America until it was canceled due to U.S. sanctions. It was the only anti-war, anti-corporate comedy show on American television. Kaput. In the same week, his podcast, Moment of Clarity, was removed from Spotify, making him, I think, the most censored American. Now, he's not as censored as Julian Assange, folks, but Julian Assange ain't an American. And that's the point. That's a little bit of what we're going to talk about if we can get to it today, because I got a ton of stuff to talk about with Lee. He now does a podcast with his beautiful and talented wife, Eleanor Goldfield, common censored on iTunes, Spotify, and everywhere podcasts are heard. On YouTube, Lee Camp now has a new show called Dangerous Ideas with Lee Camp. He's on Substack. I get all of his stuff on leecamp.locals.com, where I throw him a few bucks, and you can too, to try to always heed his call to keep fighting. My God, I love Lee Camp. Let's click a button here and bring him in here and say good morning. And it is still morning out there where he's at. Good morning to Lee Camp. Hi, Lee.
It's an honor. Thanks for having me. Congrats on 5 years. That's no small accomplishment.
Yeah, the way that I put it to people is, I came out of corporate America, Lee. I was trying to make enough money, get to retirement early, actually. And I came out of retirement. I kept my head down in the business world because my owners, like most owners, they're all right-wing Republicans. Man, I wasn't talking or even looking at politics if I wanted to keep my job. And I came out on the other side here and looked around and where's the American left? Where are the people that I remember from my youth? I mean, I'm looking at mainstream media, including MSNBC and CNN and places like that. What the hell? These people are Republicans. This shit is right wing. Where's the left wing? Well, it was nowhere to be seen. And I said to myself, well, I'm going to do a podcast. I'm going to do a show. I'm going to jump in here and try to contribute what little I can to this ragtag patchwork quilt of left-wing media. And now here we are 5 years later.
Yeah, the American left is nearly non-existent. Although if you watch Fox News or something, apparently left-wing socialists have taken over the entire government and every government across the United States. We just can't seem to find them. But yeah, they run everything.
I'm going to start this show with this book that I really like. Because I mentioned he's a writer, he's an author. This is Bullet Points and Punchlines. Get this book, folks, because I don't know why it should still be a bestseller. I don't know if it's on any list right now, but if you want bullet points, if you want to easily referenced issues of today that are sourced, that are facts, get this book. You can thumb through this thing and you can find little passages like this, which I read all the time. I really like to read this. Now I don't have my reading glasses. So it says, Lee Camp says, I don't just mean there should be a report every couple of hours about climate change or bloviating bullhorns of mainstream news. I don't mean once a day should mention to a friend that Al Gore seems vaguely douchey, but probably has a point. I mean, climate change should be all we're thinking about. It should be a major factor in every conversation, every job, every TV show, every humor column, every tweet, every clever t-shirt slogan, and every fortune cookie message. Climate change should be everything. And I'm going to use that to take us to our first story, because what is it about? It's the news of the day. This just came out. And on first note, I looked at this late and I thought, this is great. Biden uses executive power to create a New Deal style American Climate Corps. So I read into this. This is from the Associated Press, so you got to take that in context. Washington AP Dateline. And it reads, after being thwarted by Congress. Wait, full stop. I highlighted this because, Lee, I know you've talked about this on your show a lot. Joe Biden, despite being the guy that on the Democratic side most responsible maybe for the Iraq war that put 100,000 innocent civilians in the ground, which I argued vociferously against electing him because of that. But
they now say closer to 1 million, but yeah.
Yeah. And then you did a piece where if you extend it out over the region and around the world, it's multiples of million, right?
It's the Brown University Cost of War found that 6 million people have been killed by our global war on terror since 2001. So 6 million.
Yeah. And he's thwarted by Congress. The people that supported him, Lee, said, well, one reason to elect this guy is he's got like a 30, 40-year career, something like that in Congress. He's the Sultan of the Senate. Man, this guy can get into the White House and he can really get things done because he knows how to make things work in Congress. Instead, he's one of the most thwarted presidents in the history. Joe Manchin owns his ass in the U.S. Senate.
This is part of the theatrics. It's part of the game they play, that apparently the Democrats can just never get anything done. They can just never seem to get something through. Oh, man, they really want to help you. They really care about American workers. They really care about climate crisis. They really care about creating peace around the world and all these other things. They just can't seem to get any of it through. Meanwhile, how much did Donald Trump do actually approved by? Because we're told by the liberal media and portions of the media are definitely liberal. It's not all liberal, but we're told by the liberal media that Donald Trump did all this awful, crazy stuff. And he did. But how much of that was actually through Congress? The only thing I can even remember him getting through Congress was his horrid tax break for corporations and the wealthiest Americans that was signed off on by both Democrats and Republicans. So most of his horror show had nothing to do with Congress. He used every trick in the book to do it outside of Congress. So Biden could be doing those things. There are many executive actions he could be taking without even going to Congress. But instead, the Democrats like to say, oh, we tried so hard, but Congress stopped us. We wanted to give you $15 an hour, but the parliamentarian stopped us. No one had even heard of the parliamentarian. It didn't exist until they made it up a few years ago. And so this is just ongoing theatrics.
Let me read into this because, this thing, I ought to read this paragraph. It says, in an announcement Wednesday, the White House said the program will employ more than 20,000 young adults who will build trails, plant trees, help install solar panels, and do other work to boost the conservation and help prevent catastrophic wildfires. Now, good news, bad news. That really sounds great. This is under executive order, as Lee mentioned. No Biden, no executive order. I mean, this goes away instantly. The Sultan of the Senate wasn't able to get anything done like this through Congress. So that's what happens. The Climate Corps has been proposed in earlier versions of the sweeping climate law approved last year. Again, this is from Associated Press. Now, I talk about every word means something on my show all the time. I'm a journalist by training and background, Lee. I mean, the mainstream media ingrains this thinking in our minds by talking about this sweeping climate law, which compared to what we had, it is. But as Stephen Semler points out, and he's been on my show several times, it's $300 and some billion spread out over 10 years to save us from species extinction. That's what we've been able to allocate for this. Meanwhile, The U.S. military gets $1 trillion annually renewable every year from Congress, but that never gets mentioned. These things are never put into this kind of spending context, Lee.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And on top of that, it really is the devil's in the details. What in this quote unquote sweeping climate law is it? Like, how much of it is funneled into the hands of giant corporate entities that, yeah, they might create some solar panels or something, but they're actually giant polluting entities, etc. And so you really have to, the devil really is in the details. And you can't, even if it were the best climate law in the world, even though it's underfunded, even if it were the best in the world, you can't do that while simultaneously pumping fossil fuels, while simultaneously giving subsidies to big oil companies at a tremendous rate. I mean, Biden is beating Trump on this level in many regards, trying to open up the Arctic. He just leased a massive swath of the Gulf of Mexico to oil drilling. We saw how well that went with the Deepwater Horizon, the Willow Project, so many, the MVP pipeline, Mountain Valley Pipeline. It just horrific levels of more fossil fuels careening into the worst climate crisis that anyone could ever imagine. And that's while these articles are saying, oh, look, Joe Biden's doing so much for the climate. Bull. You can't do that while pumping fossil fuels. Obama bragged, and now Biden's following in his footsteps. Obama bragged about laying more oil pipeline than any president before him, enough to encircle the globe 3 times. He proudly said he made the U.S. an energy exporter, which means we have so much oil, we don't even need it all, and we're sending it overseas. And of course, none of this, and almost nobody in our mainstream, well, definitely no one in our mainstream media, but almost no one even in independent media gets to the true heart of this, which is that the reason the U.S. can print as much money as we want and still have it mean anything is due to the petrodollar. The fact that most oil still, even with what's going on, still most oil in the world is bought and sold in dollars. That makes the dollar strong. It makes it the global reserve currency. And so the dollar remains somewhat strong, or rather strong. So petrodollar, it has petro in the name. It's in the goddamn name. So the U.S. empire will do anything it can to make sure that oil keeps pumping and that it keeps being bought and sold in dollars. And until you stop that, you will not stop climate crisis. So we are careening towards this. Millions of refugees already, the millions of lives destroyed already, billions upon billions upon billions of dollars of disaster just this year. And this president's doing the equivalent of nothing. I don't care about some stupid Band-Aid where he's going to train some youngins to plant some trees. It's not enough. It's not enough.
No, it isn't enough. And you talk about that petrodollar. It's a murderous laundromat is what it is, because they use those U.S. dollars. Guess what they're used for? To buy weapons. I mean, that's what it's all. It's oil and weapons. And that's what we are. That's who we are as a nation. And it's often forgotten.
You want an example of where this money goes? And this just came out a couple of weeks ago by ProPublica. The $100 billion spent on the Navy's, it's called the Littoral Combat Ship, Littorl, Littoral or something, which means by the shore. But the Littoral Combat Ship that's over 20 years turned out to be not combat worthy and barely a ship. So the Littoral Combat Ship is really literally not a combat ship. And they spent $100 billion on it, and now they're dumping it. Ultimately, only 35 or something were made. It's just insane the amount of money dumped into these things.
Yeah, let me get back to this because I'm trying to get these comments up. Man, we got a lot of people. Everybody loves Lee Camp. It's hard for me to get these up on screen. Let me click back here to bring me back on, because what I wanted to talk about here, and you covered this briefly. I mean, let's say you don't understand MMT or the petrodollar or that anything. This is this argument that is disgusting. Republicans concerned about the cost. I mean, this will come up on the Democratic side as well. Lee, the national debt right now, I think, stands at $33 trillion. And again, I cite this book all the time. I learned in your book that $1,000, I say this to people get sick of it on my show, I think, $1 trillion is a stack of $1,000 bills, if they printed them, which they don't, 67 miles high. I mean, that's from where I'm at to northern Iowa almost. My God, it's incredible. But the point is, cost should never be a reason not to do something from keeping us from becoming extinct, as an example. You can't quantify it. You can't count it. It ain't real. It's just a way to control us, I believe.
Well, and yeah, the concerns about cost, but they only have concerns about cost when it's to do something that might help the American people, fix our bridges or give people a better
Yes.
minimum wage or give people housing. Then they have concerns about cost. They don't have concerns about cost when they're talking about military. Like you said, it's over $1 trillion a year if you count the black budget for our military, but also that doesn't even count the 21 trillion, or it's closer to 35 trillion now, of unaccounted for financial adjustments within the Pentagon's books. The Pentagon has audited itself. It takes a year and over 1,000 auditors each time they do it, looking through all of the Pentagon's books. They've been audited 5 times. Every time they've come up with the same result. That result is, we failed our audit. That's it. That's all we learned. And in the last one, when they announced they failed their audit, they also stated that they can't account for 55% of the Pentagon's assets. 55% of their assets, they don't actually know where they are. They don't know their assets from their elbows over there at the Pentagon. And yet everybody is worried about cost when it comes to dealing with climate crisis or feeding people, but they never care about cost when it's millions, billions, and trillions of dollars dumped in to military and war. And not only does it go to killing, we talked about the 6 million dead from the global war on terror. Not only does it go to killing, but it also is a giant money laundering machine. It takes, and I know you and I have just mentioned MMT, but ostensibly it takes taxpayer dollars, money launders them to the Pentagon, and then puts them in the pockets of the richest Americans, contractors, lobbyists, etc. So you take all that $1 trillion, and most of it ends up back in the pockets of the rich, while all of this killing and destruction is happening at the same time. And we started off talking about climate crisis and got into military, but the military is also, in terms of an organization, not an industry, but an organization, the biggest climate crisis cause organization in the world, the biggest emitter for a single organization in the world. And so you can't talk about military without also talking about climate crisis. But of course, your mainstream media will never make that connection.
Mainstream media, I got to ask you this, because we talk about this on my show all the time. Are they too dumb, or are they in on it? I think you probably believe, definitely when it comes to the government, they're in on it. Some of the media is pretty dumb, but they appear to be in on it. What about the American people? The fact that we can't seem to see through this, can't seem to understand this, or just don't care. What's your take on that?
Well, I go back and forth between yelling at the American people, wake up, and also understanding that the American lives, as the lives of many people around the world, are very difficult. People are working very hard. People are slaving away to try and afford to have a normal life, to have some comfort, to be able to take care of their kids. And so I understand that they're not also spending their hours reading behind the lies of CNN and Fox News and trying to dig deeper. So there's definitely part of that that I understand how difficult that can be. I mean, I find it exhausting too, and it's technically my job. Propaganda works. People are confused by it. In terms of the people that actually work in the mainstream media, I'd say it's a nice, beautiful mix of those who are dumb enough to believe the garbage that they speak and have never looked beyond it with, and this probably goes for the faces you see on TV a lot, those who just know what they're getting paid for. They know what they're supposed to say. They know what will get them kicked off the air. Usually they know what won't, and they work their way up the ranks, saying those lies, spitting out the things that will keep them on CNN or MSNBC or NBC or any of these channels. And you've seen what has happened to those who who go rogue, to those who go outside what's
Yes.
allowable. Chris Hedges, who was a colleague of mine and a friend of mine, he Pulitzer Prize winner at New York Times, but when he came out against the Iraq War, they quickly pushed him out. Jesse Ventura was going to be the tent post show of MSNBC, but then the Iraq War starts, and they ask him if he can stop being anti-war, and he says no. And they paid him upwards of $10 million just to get out of his contract, just to kick him to the curb, so they wouldn't have to have a anti-war voice on their network. And you can go down the list for a half an hour, but those are definitely two big ones.
Well, here's two others. Ed Schultz. I mean, he was fired because he said, "Yeah, I'm going to cover Bernie." They said, "No, you're not." Yeah. And Phil Donahue in the first Iraq War, he wanted to cover he wanted to put anti-war voices on. Guess what happened to Phil? Not same thing. He's gone also.
Yeah, and Ed Schultz is a good example because hugely popular show, but also not. I would barely call him a left winger. He was pro Bernie because he was pro worker, and he was basically a slightly more left wing Democrat. And I'm not saying that as an insult. I think he would have called himself that too if he were around today. And that's all you have to be to get kicked out of these networks. Just slightly more left wing than the average Democrat in Congress, which is a right winger. That is a pro corporate, pro war, pro environmental destruction right winger. If you are a Democrat or Republican in Congress, almost without exception.
I'm going to play this clip now. Regular viewers of my show have seen this a few times, but I love this. This is from the movie Casino, Lee. This is Robert De Niro talking to his slot machine manager on the floor of the casino after 3 jackpots are hit. And he's talking to this guy. This is me and you and Robert De Niro talking to the media. Watch this.
Listen, if you didn't know you're being scammed, you're too fucking dumb to keep this job. If you did know you were in on it, either way, you're out. Get out. Go on. Let's go.
So that's what I would like to tell those people. If
you didn't know this was a scam, then you're an idiot. If you did know, then you're in on it.
Yes, and in either event, you cannot work here. You can't continue to do this. And the litmus test for that on all of these major networks and politicians and stuff for me in modern history is that Iraq War that we talked about earlier. I mean, if you promoted and supported that, Antony Blinken, as an example, our chief diplomat, the head of the U.S. State Department, you can't work here. You can't do that. Yet these people continue to get elevated, promoted, and elected in the instance of Joe Biden. And that's why I was so negative about Joe Biden. I bought into that Donald Trump, worst of two evils thing the first time around, but I ain't buying that this time around. I mean, this guy, Biden, is as advertised. I tell people to believe the racing form of history. They said he was a warmonger. They said when he gets in, the world will be at war. And look at what's happened as advertised, Lee.
Yeah, he also said when I think he didn't know that it was going to come out, he said when he gave a wealthy fundraiser, nothing basically is going to change. And man, has he lived up to that. It's all the same garbage. To go back to your thing about the WD and Iraq and the media, of course, you never get an apology when they ultimately admit these things that many of us were saying from day one. But on top of that, just the other day, Anderson Cooper had Cornel West on, and he's castigating him because, how dare you run as a third-party candidate? And one of the things, and Cornel West brings up the hundreds of thousands that have died in Iraq, and Anderson Cooper's response is, "I know." He goes, "I was there." Anderson Cooper I was there. And I'm like, yeah, you were there manufacturing consent for that war. You shouldn't proudly say I was there. You were there doing the bidding, licking the boots of the corporate empire to make sure people approved of the Iraq War. Anderson Cooper was saying I was there as if he was there trying to stop it. It's amazing that they can still say those things and get away with it.
Now, I want to put, we get these comments coming in, and most of them, they all love Lee, but I want to put the questions up particularly. I don't know. My response to this on Twitter was, this is too deep in the weeds for me to be arguing about these campaign managers and stuff. I just had Dr. West on last week. I mean, I really like this guy, but what do you think of this appointment of Dow? Yeah.
So Maple Mary there is asking what I think of Peter Dow taking over as Cornel West campaign manager. And Dow, for those who don't know, Dow was a huge Democratic campaign manager and insider until he switched and became what appears to be on Twitter, essentially a leftist, very anti-Democrat and Republican. And so, I've agreed with everything the guy has said, I think, over the past, I don't know how many years, basically since the last election or before that. And so he's done a lot of good work. But my point would be that, and so some people are saying, well, once a Democrat, always a Democrat. And so they're upset that Cornel West has chosen him as a campaign manager. But my view would just be, let's see what Cornel West does. If it feels like he's shifting or changing because he has a new campaign manager, then you can be upset with that. But to just throw this, just say, oh, well, clearly this is a joke because this guy used to be a Democrat. I don't know. To me, it's too much of a purity test. The other thing, here's the thing. I endorse Cornel West? I endorse Cornel West. I endorse Claudia de la Cruz, who's running in the PSL for president in the PSL party. I endorse a lot of third-party candidates who are willing to shift the debate. It's very unlikely that any of them will win, but I think the goal for me in this electoral shit show theatrics is to expand the debate, expand the talking points, expand what people can think about, expand where that mind is, because we're not going to win this at the ballot box. A lot of these changes, as we're saying with Biden or a Republican, would not happen electorally. This is a bought system, 100%. The massive Princeton study showed that nothing happens through our government unless it aligns with corporate interests. 0% of the time will it happen if the American people want it, and it doesn't align with corporate interests. So this is a bought system. And in a bought system, I believe that these third-party candidates, Cornel West, Claudia de la Cruz, in the past, people like Jill Stein, can broaden the debate, make people think, and we need a revolution of the mind. So I'm endorsing all of them in hope of the revolution of the mind. And in fact, I am the campaign manager for another third-party candidate. It's a rock I found in my yard. I'm running for president because I think it could do a better job than Joe Biden, a better job than Donald Trump, a better job than any of these corrupt politicians. I think we need a rock literally sitting on the Oval Office desk, and there would be so much more peace in this world, so much more just security, and we could work towards sustainability. And the website for that is yardrock2024. Yardrock 2024.
That's great, man. This is why I love Lee Camp. I mean, I'm really having fun here. Now, before we leave the issue of Cornel West, I told him during the interview, Lee, I said, we live in a 2020 world. 20 minutes, we could be dead accidentally or on purpose from a nuclear strike. That's a fact. 20 years or less, I think we're going to be facing extinction because of the climate. He says, man, I like that. He says, that 2020 thing. He says, that's really good. I said, well, you can use that. That's an original. I go ahead and throw that out there on the campaign trail. The other thing that I put up to him, I wanted to get your feeling about this, and he didn't warm up to this so much, but I said, just like you delineated, he's not going to win. These third-party candidates aren't going to win, but it's great. We got to get started. I mean, Chris Hedges talks about this all the time. We got to begin. If we hadn't done this back in the 1800s, we still have the Whigs and the Democrats, and we'd still have slavery. I mean, we got to get a third party in here. The third party, the anti-slavery party back in 1855 or some shit like that. Yeah, that was the Republicans, believe it or not. We got to get a third party going. We got to get it supported. And so that's why I like it. But the other thing I ran by Dr. West was this, what I call that coined as a get one strategy. And you've probably heard this before, but go ahead and run your candidacy, get the Green Party nomination, go right up and tell the general, Dr. West. And then when panic sets in with the Democrats because they think some serendipity may be going on, or because maybe he's going to win legit, Donald Trump is sitting at the doorstep and everybody is freaking out. Tell the Democrats that you will drop out, maybe not endorse anybody, but you're just going to release your supporters, followers, and delegates if you have any. And you'll do that in exchange for leading a peace negotiation to Ukraine, which we ain't got. Maybe legalize marijuana, which we ain't got. Maybe freeing Julian Assange, which we don't have. We've never won any of these things, including emergency declarations and help for the people in East Palestine and Maui and that type of thing. These executive actions that can be done that don't need congressional approval. And the idea behind that is get one thing. In my lifetime, almost, we haven't won anything. Get these bastards to do one thing in exchange for this Trump freak out that's coming in November 2024. What do you think of that strategy?
Well, I like the idea of having leverage, and you definitely would have some leverage. But a few things. One is you obviously could not talk about it beforehand, because then everyone would know you were planning on dropping out the whole time you're running. So it would not be like that, like something you could run on. But then the other thing that I think might complicate it is if the Democrats aren't I'm talking about the ones in DNC, federal Democrats. If they're not idiots, they actually do know that when you actually look at who votes for those third party, who voted for Jill Stein, you've got about a third who would have said they would have voted for Hillary. You got about a third who say they would have voted for Trump if Jill Stein hadn't been in the race. And then you got about a third who say they weren't going to vote at all. So the truth is, Jill Stein did not sway the election. And that will probably be the case in the next time around, that the people who vote for, say, the Green Party, it's usually a third might have, held their nose and voted for either Hillary or Trump or Biden or Trump or whatever. And then the final third wouldn't have voted at all. So it doesn't actually, shift the election. But many Democrats love to put forward that talking point that, oh, you're going to vote Green, well, you're going to give it to the Republicans. But that's not how it works.
I also saw some data that showed that even Bernie, with his massive following and huge support, his people fell in line and voted for Hillary. That wasn't the determining factor in Trump winning in 2016. It wasn't even Bernie's people, let alone Jill Stein. Bernie's a Democrat, and his supporters voted Democrat. People have asked me what's going to happen here with the Iowa caucuses. Well, the Democrats in Iowa are going to do what the DNC wants. They're Democrats, folks. I mean, that's what's going to happen with the Iowa caucuses. Let me get to this because time is going by so fast with Lee. This is something else that I found out about actually on Lee's show. And this is more than the quiet part out loud. If we don't get anything else on the show, I wanted to have Lee talk about this because we've been propagandized, bullshitted up to our eyeballs on the reason for the Ukraine war. The media would have us believe that it's this nut Putin, and he is a nut, and it is criminal what he did and that type of thing. But he's on a march through, hell, I don't know, Europe or Asia or that part of the hemisphere and that globe anyway to take over the world. And Ukraine's just a small part of it. Zelensky's come over to the United States and said that bug-eyed Gomer Adam Schiff stood in the well of Congress in the impeachment hearings and said, we got to fight him over there, or we'll have to fight him here. Well,
don't forget Sean Penn.
Yeah, Sean Penn. I'm going to bring him up too. But anyway, this is from Caitlin Johnstone, and she's citing opening remarks at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization meeting. This is from the NATO chief himself. And what he's saying here, I'll just read this very quickly and I'll turn it over to Lee. Well, you have to remember the background. This guy from NATO says the background was that President Putin declared in the autumn of 2021 and actually sent a draft treaty that they wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was what he sent us and was a precondition for not invading Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that. The opposite happened. Okay, I'm not going to continue to read this, but that's the point, Lee. Go ahead and explain this.
Yeah, this is a huge admission by the head of NATO. And basically, no one in America knows it happened because it's not covered on your mainstream media.
Yeah.
Jens Stoltenberg, who's the NATO chief, head of NATO, gave a big speech, like you just read part of it, where he said that the real reason, and this goes against all the propaganda that we've been hearing about Ukraine for a year and a half. This goes against Putin's just Hitler and he just wants to steal as many countries as possible and all that stuff that we've been hearing for a year and a half, even though many of us in independent media knew it wasn't the truth. But the NATO chief has just admitted that the real reason Putin invaded Ukraine, and I'm opposed to war, so I'm also opposed to the invasion, but that doesn't mean I don't want to know the truth. And the truth is, as Jens Stoltenberg said, that the reason he invaded Ukraine was to stop NATO expansion. And he sent, not only was it agreed in the Minsk Accords, which were ignored by Ukraine after they were signed, but also he said, as Jens Stoltenberg said just there, Putin sent something saying that he would not invade if NATO would stop expanding and would go back to territory from several years ago. And they, of course, did not sign it. Basically, they said, no, we're going to keep expanding. And Russia has said for many, many years that this was a red line for them, expanding towards Russia. We've surrounded Russia with NATO, which is a military enterprise. And so that is the real reason that, the biggest real reason that he invaded Ukraine. And here is the head of NATO admitting it. This upends all of the propaganda we've heard for a year and a half. And it's just pathetic that people don't even know this is being admitted. Now, why did he admit it? You may find it very odd that he would go against Western propaganda. It's because in that speech, he's trying to brag. He's bragging that Putin wanted NATO to be smaller. And the result of this invasion of Ukraine has been a larger NATO because they've added Sweden and Finland. So this was Jens Stoltenberg bragging. And unfortunately, his brag upends all of the propaganda we've heard for so long.
Yeah, he might have been too dumb to even say that, but that's a nice segue into what we've been talking about a little bit here, but it's this next slide, and this is from Lee's show. Everything mainstream media has gotten wrong over the years. Now, we can't cover everything, but
everything.
Yeah, there's the vial of angel dust or the sarin or whatever Colin Powell was telling us was moving around along with those trucks with the weapons of mass destruction that turned out to be ice cream trucks. These people have been wrong, and not just wrong, but it's resulted in the deaths of millions of people and the blackening of this earth. I mean, we've incinerated the planet, for God's sake. And it brings me to my next point. And Lee brought this up. This guy, Sean Penn. What in the hell? You heard me talk about the patchwork quilt of left-wing media. I mean, Lee and I are having to do this show today to get our voices heard, to get out here. This guy comes in, this warmonger, this nut, Sean Penn, gets a seat on Face the Nation, for God's sake. No Chris Hedges. None of these great voices. Lee Camp could be on here. John Pilger could be on here. All of these great Pulitzer Prize winning, Emmy nominated, Abby Martin type people could represent a left wing point of view on these Sunday morning talk shows. They never get on, Lee, but Sean Penn does. What do you make of that?
Yeah, you asked earlier about whether these people are just dumb enough to believe this crap or they are part of the lies. I think Sean Penn is just this stupid. I mean, it is a breathtaking level of ignorance that he has. He honestly believes that creating endless war is peace. He is supporting this Orwellian stance that if we just keep bombing and if we send cluster bombs, which are banned in 100 countries, if we send those to Nazis in Ukraine, then everything will be fine. And by the way, the New York Times even did an article about how many Ukrainian soldiers have swastikas, etc., on their uniforms because there is a heavy Nazi element over there. And Sean Penn is just endorsing all of this, acting like he's trying to save the world. And it's amazing how dumb he is. I remember several years ago after Hillary lost. And of course, in his mind, if Hillary had won, then everything would be great in the world. And years ago, after Hillary had lost, he said, I contacted the Hillary Clinton campaign. And before the election, I told her when she was going to pick her vice president that all she needed to do was pick John Kasich as her vice president, and she would have won. So this idiot thinks that the only thing missing from Hillary's campaign was a Republican as vice president. I mean, he's just so dumb. It's just unbelievable. It honestly is the privilege of a mediocre white man who's been rich since his teenage years and is so disconnected from the real world that he has no idea what's happening.
And I could an entire laundry list of Pulitzer Prize winning journalists who should have a seat at the table in these discussions, and they could sway minds, I think, but they don't get that seat. Seymour
Well,
Hersh would be another
yeah.
perfect example.
Yeah, and let me just add, when you say, we don't get me or Abby Martin or Chris Hedges or any of these people get on Face the Nation or the other biggest
Nobody's
talk
watching
shows.
anyway.
Not only do we not get on there, but you and I haven't in this interview gotten into the aggressive online censorship against those of us speaking about these issues. I mean, I obviously have lost my TV show, and in the same week when the TV show was shut down, they banned my YouTube channel around the globe. It's still banned today. They banned my podcast from Spotify, but I've renamed it, so it's back up. It's called The Lee Camp Show on Spotify. And they just, and the shadow banning. I mean, my Facebook has been shadow banned with 330,000 followers, been shadow banned since 2016. It's shown to very few people. And so it's just aggressive censorship and suppression. So it's not even just that we can't get on the mainstream media. It's that we're dangerous even on YouTube. I mean, the amount of effort they have to go to try and shut all of us up who even begin to speak the truth is really impressive, because there was a golden window there from about 2006 when computers and internet were free and fast in just about every home, to about 2016 when Bernie almost won the primary, even though it was rigged. He almost won it even in the rigging. He almost won it. And after that point, they shut it all down. They shadow banned, deleted. There were 800, this is several years ago now, 800 Facebook pages deleted on one day. And it was all things like Free Thought Project, antiwar.com, all these pro-peace, anti-surveillance type of organizations, just Facebook pages deleted.
Yeah, we're just about out of time here. I have to be respectful of Lee's time. He's great to come on the show here and help me celebrate my 5th anniversary. I mentioned those little things that I coined earlier. Maybe you've heard this before, but this is from Mary Knox. This is great. I'm going to use this. She says, one of my friends always says bombing for peace is like fucking for virginity. That's a classic. That's great. We'll hit this one here before we get off, Lee, very quickly, because this dovetails with what you're talking about. This is from Mediaite, and this is showing the media, and this is part of the propaganda, and maybe it's more than that. Maybe this is an accurate mirror of who we are and how we think and how we see things. And it's very small here. You won't be able to see it, but the arrows here are showing Lee Camp on the left with the Revolutionary Blackout Network, and TYT is over there. I don't know why exactly, but then over on the right, and not that far off, and what an insult. Alex Jones is over here, and they're trying to show the range of media in America. What do you make of this, Lee?
This is a garbage chart put out by Mediaite and another organization. And it's almost exclusively corporate media they have on this chart, except for me and a couple others. But it's trying to show, first of all, whether you're right or left wing. And so it puts me on the left. That part I agree with. I don't know why Revolutionary Blackout Network, they do good stuff, but I don't know why they're more left wing than me. I certainly don't know why Young Turks is more left wing. But the real problematic thing is not the right left thing. It's the reliable, unreliable. So the lower on the chart you are, the more unreliable and fake news you are. And they have me very low on this chart. Meanwhile, they have all the propaganda outlets that have fallen for every last lie that has been upended and proven wrong and debunked over the past 20 years. Those are the reliable networks. Places like CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, those are all given a good reliability rating, even though they fell for WMD and Russiagate and the Cuban acoustic gun attacks. And every bullshit story that has ever come out has been pumped out of these outlets, and I have not fallen for any of them, but I get put as the unreliable one or the mistruthful one on this chart. And so this is just more propaganda trying to get people to stop watching us, stop listening. I mean, even my email list nowadays, Google puts a thing at the top of the emails, my newsletters, that says this appears to be spam or phishing. So be forewarned. This email is dangerous.
Yeah, and what is dangerous, to Lee's point, what he was talking about, these falsehoods that have been promulgated by the mainstream media, my God, it's resulted in the deaths of millions of people. And he ran down that list. Think about those Russian bounties. Think about the babies thrown out of the incubators that led up to the first Gulf War, as an example. All that stuff is false. It's not true. The weapons of mass destruction in Iraq first and foremost. And yet we go back to these people, and that arrow that I've got on the screen there, that's Rachel Maddow sticking out over there. I mean, she bought into all that shit, including Russiagate and all of that.
She has never apologized for every debunked story from Russiagate that she spit out over 4 years.
My God. Well, we got to go. I got to, again, Lee's got other things to do today. Let me click this off here and bring that up. I want to end here, Lee, just by giving you the last word, because you deserve it. I'm a huge fan. I love this. And I'm going to put up some URLs, and let me see this one thing here about the, where is that? Let me find that. I will find it. Has to do with your show. Where are you?
Oh,
the comedy show. There it is. All right. Let me.
Yeah. These are some of the topics I'm covering in my next live Zoom comedy show. So, I did for 25 years. I've been a stand-up comic, but a combination of the pandemic and other reasons, I have barely done any touring. So I wanted to do live comedy, but I wanted to be able to do it to, around the world, to anybody who wants to attend. So these are live Zoom comedy shows. My next one's October 14th. And it's a full hour of brand new live stand-up comedy performed for anybody for $5 who wants to attend. And they're all at all those tickets and everything. And the info is at leecamp.simpletix. That's TIX.com. But all my other stuff is on Twitter at Lee Camp, and leecamp.net is my locals page where you can support my show. I also am I live stream 4 days a week. So I am busy in the live streaming front. I live stream 4 days a week. It's all at rumble.com/Lee Camp. So.
Yeah, he's not only the most censored man or comedian in America, he's also one of the busiest. So we got to let him go. Lee Camp, thanks again for helping me celebrate the 5-year anniversary of my show, and good luck on everything you do, man. And I love to say,
5 years and keep speaking the truth.
Well, you keep fighting. I mean, that's a Lee Camp original. That's his phrase. And I try to bear that in mind with everything that I do on this show. Lee, thanks again for coming on the live line.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, and he's on his way, folks. He's got to get going. So I want to close this out just by saying, if you like seeing Lee Camp on my show when I can get him on, and I'd love to get Eleanor Goldfield on, and this album of hers, I got this over here. I wanted to show that during the show. I didn't get it on. God, this is great. Eleanor Goldfield, what a talent. My God, this record is wonderful. My wife and I invested in that. I play the digital downloads on my phone when I'm out moving around. I listen to that more than I do the album because I don't want to scratch it up, but it is great. You can find Eleanor online as well. But if you like Podcast by George, you like this show, go to podcastbygeorge.com. If you haven't already subscribed, you can sign up for the live streams for Facebook and YouTube there. And that's where it's easiest done. And it's all free. And then you can also sign up for the audio only podcast. Those are, like iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio app, and even Amazon Music. All of those places are at podcastbygeorge.com. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.